Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to some of you, and peace out to the rest of you. Hit the share button because the message is more important than the messenger. In this part two of a pro FBA attitude amidst mass deportations, I'm going to state actually a pretty practical reason, not just an emotional pro-black reason or pan-African reason, but an actual practical set of reasons, I should say, for why it is that I am not as neutral about the U.S. grabbing up black immigrants and sending them out. Now, on one hand, it is much more difficult for someone black to migrate into the United States illegally. And that's if it's someone black from the Americas or from the continent. Black folks just don't get to do that easily. You have many black people that go to the States, and it's legit. That's how they get into the U.S. They got to get a scholarship and a visa, or prove that their parents can afford tuition, and then they get a visa. It's a lot. U.S. embassies and consulates abroad make it difficult to go to the States from black countries. And even in places where you have both black and non-black populations, they still make it difficult if the people are just not white. And if you have black and white living in the same place, they still generally make it difficult. Black folks with non-black passports, if you want to call it that, are the ones that have the easiest time. It's easiest generally for a black Britisher to get a visa to go, or a black Canadian to go. The Bahamas are an exception. A black Emirati could easily go to the States. Theoretically, a black Chilean could easily go, but there aren't that many. I don't even know if many Chileans would ever meet them because it's so rare. Chileans can get into the States more easily than an Argentine citizen can. So in any case, getting back to this, in order for a black person to just illegally sneak into the States, they have to go into Mexico if they can get into Mexico, and then sneak across the border in one of those caravans. And here's where that becomes an issue. Now you have someone that might be willing to do any damn thing, anything at all. People that migrate to the States or into the U.S. legally, and then they overstay, which is more likely to be what happens if a black person is there illegally. That is not somebody that's going to turn around and just start committing a large number of crimes because they're untraceable. There's no record of them entering, no name, no fingerprints on record, nothing like that, no biometrics. They're not likely to do that. The people that were likely to just go, just wild the uck out, were generally speaking people that just snuck in. They were likely to do that. And as we already know, You had Venezuelans taking over apartments. Those were not Venezuelans that had entered the U.S. legally and then overstayed the duration of their stay. They were not them. So, number one, let's understand that you hardly have black immigrants that are just wilding the uck out, just going in and just willing to commit any particular crime. Now, they can misbehave, socially speaking, but as far as outright breaking the law, that's not something they tend to do. But most Latin Americans that go into the United States illegally, just sneak in, most of them aren't going to break other laws. Entering the U.S. without permission is a crime. Without citizenship or permission, yeah, that's a crime. Asking for asylum is a legal way to enter the U.S. if you have a reason to ask for it. Your case will be reviewed and then a decision will be made in a court eventually. Until that time, you stay in the States on asylum. But what I want to try to get you guys to understand is that we can look at some of the behaviors of any particular group within the states legally or in the states illegally or not even subject to this debate because they're from the states. We could look at any of them. We could look at original American tribes and talk about certain behaviors they have of which we don't approve. And that's one thing. But in terms of just outright being criminals and violent and completely unfettered and with no scruples and just gonna do any goddamn mother cuss word thing they want to do when they want to do it. In actuality, number one, the children of such people are the ones that are the most likely to act a mother cuss word fool. I taught middle school. Most of the kids I taught were the children of undocumented immigrants. Now, the kids sometimes had been born stateside. Other times they had gone in with their parents and they were not citizens. And if there'd been an ICE raid, they'd have been picked up. And this was well over a decade ago. So they're not in school anymore anyway. If they were not supposed to be in the States, they're probably being chased after or picked up somewhere else, not at the school. Maybe their own kids, if they had kids too young, are being picked up at some elementary schools right now. But I can tell you that what I saw was that those kids had no sense of accountability. They didn't have it. It wasn't there. There were quite a few black children that were in there. They were not the majority, but there were quite a few that were there. They were FBA. They were Jamaican Americans. They were Liberians legally, maybe a few Nigerians. There were some kids there. They were from the States. They were from the islands. They were from the continent. They were there legally. They had to be. Now, usually they would have a sense of accountability. And that's one thing I noticed that was different. They had a sense of accountability that was far beyond that of the Latin Americans. But by the same token, their parents would turn around. If they were in trouble, their parents would say, well, I don't see why he's in that much trouble. But they'd whoop that ass at home. That kid would come back better behaved. The Latin kids would come back just as bad. They come back worse the next day because you punished them than they came back the day before because their parents were scared to spank them. We are not the same. I'm not condoning entering into the States illegally at a time when black folks need you to not do that. See, I don't respect white folks' immigration laws. I'll just tell y'all straight up, I don't. I mean, follow them, but I don't respect them. Then again, I don't immigrate into their societies. I transit through them when I'm traveling, and then I fit the guck on. Even if my U.S. passport entitles me to stay for a long stretch, I don't do that. I just transit through them. If I got to change flights in Europe, I change flights in Europe. I don't want to stay. I don't need to see their sites. Nothing like that. Their sites are ours to see. I don't particularly like being surrounded by them, but I look at them and I say, what the hell right do any white folks on this planet at this point, aside from Eastern Europeans, have to tell anybody else to fit the guck out? And this is why it is that I'm not going to come down hard on black immigrants. One, they ain't the damn problem. They are forced to be legal in many cases. And if they're illegal, it is because they overstayed a duration. Number two, legal or illegal, they ain't the ones wilding out. They ain't kicking in doors and taking over entire apartment complexes. Only black immigrants that are doing that usually don't know they don't want to admit they're black, at least. So they're not us anyway. They're not like they're not like black folks from the continent who know they're black, or from the Caribbean who in most cases know they're black. No, they ain't. I get some black Venezuelans that march up, sneak in. Yeah, you got them, but do they see themselves as black? Well, you all told me they don't. And honestly, Venezuelan Spanish is so damn bad and lazy, I wouldn't understand them if they said it. Just being honest. Colombians and Venezuelans don't sound the same. I don't understand Venezuelans when they talk. They could be speaking another language. I'm sorry. I don't understand that Dominican Spanish, Cuban, Puerto Rican Spanish, and I didn't realize that the Venezuelans sounded the exact same. You're too lazy to pronounce your S's. You might as well. No, it's not my job to understand you. You screwed your language up, not me. Don't worry, I tell Egyptians the same thing about Arabic. I'm not just picking on them. But I'm going to call it like I see it. When I lived there, I didn't see this sense of unaccountability, this entitlement to get away with breaking every goddamn rule that's in place for a good reason amongst them. Like I said, when I've seen this sort of thing amongst any black folks at all, it's been one particular cultural group within one nationality that would act like this. One. Now, I've seen where they have disagreements with black Americans about certain things. Talking about black folks from other countries in general. But I've never actually met some that just hated black Americans. I have to hear about them. I don't come across them. The ones I come across that dislike black Americans also dislike Yorubas. They dislike the Edo. These are people from tribes they come in contact with. They dislike them too, so they don't like anybody. I bet you dollars to donuts if gambling was legal, that the man that shot the South African taxi drivers who were within their rights to protest and go after these fake taxi pirates in South Africa, I'd bet you dollars to donuts that the man that pulled that gun and shot one of the South Africans that led to some of these riots was an Igbo. That's one particular cultural group. And even then, to be honest with you, when you take some of them that don't want to act like this, they become victims of other Igbo that do act like that. Just like Egyptians amongst the Arabs. Everybody hates them. They don't know that everybody hates them, or at least dislikes them. They don't know that. They think everyone likes them. They see themselves as like the greatest Arabs and the most representative of the Arabs. And if you're going to learn Arabic, you learn their dialect because they made the most movies. And movies ain't funny. And all the other Arabs, as soon as they get to talking outside of Egypt, they get to talking, other Arabs start checking their wallets and stuff because they don't trust them. They see them as scammers. Same thing is going on when you start getting into the Gulf. Saudis are not even respected by other Gulf Arabs. They got the numbers and they got the size and the economy, but other Gulf Arabs would be like, man, I don't like them like that. I'm not talking about other Arabs. Other Gulf Arabs will tell you that. They get sick of them. The same one that'll be real nice to me, and I appreciate that. He might travel next door to the Emirates, and if an Emirati officer sees the thobes they wear, recognizes them as Saudi, and then says, "Welcome to the country. Let us know if you need any directions," which is part of Arab hospitality. The Saudi be like, "Do I look like a lost kid to you?" That's how they'll act. Be nice to me, but they might be mean to an Emirati. And then when you get the nice ones that go and visit, the police won't even talk to them anymore. It's the same thing with this particular cultural group. One. But this thing of actually hating or disliking or wanting to harm Black Americans is not something that I find or that I ever found for most Black folks of other nationalities when I lived there. They had disagreements, but I didn't hear about stuff like that. These are our relatives. And when I would talk to them, they saw us as relatives. Relatives with whom they would agree and disagree like other relatives. That's what I have seen with them. And while I'm willing to sit up here and tell a non-Black immigrant that just walked across the border illegally and got as far as they did because they're not Black and doesn't respect Black folk and thinks white folks are their damn masters, bye-bye. See you again, never. When they get nabbed up by ICE and mock them. And while I'm glad to see even some of them sisters that whose videos Dennis Sperling played sit there and mock them and say, well, you need to just work harder. You're lazy and comply with the police and everything will be fine. I'm glad to see them do this to them. Let me explain and remind us of something. When we Black folks get to arguing with each other about whatever the hell it is not the business of white folk. This is an argument between relatives. They can sit their asses out. See, there's a lady here from Pakistan that works with me. Her son is autistic. He gets agitated every so often, might throw something, draw on the walls, becomes unmanageable. Her husband left. Her husband left about when he was maybe 2 or 3, when his autism began to really show. The dad was like, I don't know how to raise him. And he gone. He been gone. Ain't seen them. And he was mild. But he had no help because neither in Pakistan nor here in Saudi, to where she moved, did anybody really know what autism is. So there was no help for him. So he went from mild to severe. Well, I don't know about severe, but in the middle. Now, my thinking is, okay, so the nigga was mild when he was younger. That means he actually is still mild. He's now he's got something else on top of it. Last night, I was about to pray, and I got this phone call from a number I don't know. And it was her. She asked if I could come talk to him. I said, yeah, give me a few minutes. I'll pray and I'll go up there. And when I was talking to him, he had his face in his phone. He wasn't even focused. I don't know what he heard and what he didn't hear. And eventually I said to him, listen, I don't know how much of what I said you heard and how much you didn't hear. But I'm sitting up here looking at you. You got a laptop and you got 2 cell phones and you acting like this. Now understand this. These things come from your mom, who's doing this by herself. I didn't go through this whole, how'd you wind up being a single mom? What did you do? And did you not listen? I didn't go through all of that with her, with the mom. And no, I would not have done this had they been Black American. She called me up. Can you come talk to? No, I can't. Where the daddy at? Yes, I would have handled these things very differently, but that's another story, and I got reasons for that too. See, in this case, I don't have a reason to disbelieve her when she says that the dad just up and left. I don't have a reason to take her word for it either. I never met the dad, so if I ever did, I'd get his side of the story. But what I would say is this. Eventually, see, as a non-family member invited to intervene because she's got this son that's getting bigger now and more uncontrollable, I'm going to turn her against him. If that boy doesn't start listening to his mom, and he can get angry about certain things, and that's fine, but if he doesn't tell me what the hell it is, then I'm not going to help him. I'm going to turn his mother against him. And eventually she's going to say, I'm sick of this little nigga. She going to do to him what an exasperated black single mom in the States would do to her son when he gets out of control. I'm going to give this boy a chance to tell me what the hell is bothering him. Might be able to walk him through it. But everything that's a solution, he avoids every single solution already. I was drilling him because I saw when he wouldn't listen. I started drilling him. I said, look, if you keep this up, I'm going to turn this computer off right now. No. What do you mean no? I reached for the computer. He tried to pull my arm back. And I pulled his arm back and said, look, kid, I know you're strong, but I'm still stronger than you. Cut this mess out. You don't tell your mother no. You just sat here and did it in front of me. Then you told your grandmother no. He reached for his phone with his other hand to call his uncle like for outside help. His uncle's in Pakistan, and the uncle was like, man, if you don't do what your mom says. But I'm telling you now, if that boy makes it hard to help, I'm not going to help. I'm going to turn the mother against him. Because she's exasperated. She doesn't know what to do with a boy. And she admits that. She's been admitting that. And I just straight told her, listen, I do what I can, but if your son disobeys you in front of me, eventually I'm going to grab him and shake him, and I'm going to beat him. I told her this a long time ago. So when she called me, she was ready for the potential of me whooping his ass. And it could have happened. Beat the brakes off that little boy. I don't care about autism. I mean, I care if someone really has an illness, but she already told me he was mild. So that meant he's capable of listening. He just decided now, since I'm bigger, I don't have to. No, that's not autism anymore. That's just him being a little Pakistani nigga. Niggas don't come from one DNA sequence. And if all he needs is a little bit more of that, what you gonna do about that attitude, and then I'll call him a niggerilla. Because it was never about shade, even though some people thought it was. But what I'm saying is that as a non-family member invited to intervene, I will do what I can. But the minute I cannot help, I'll just turn her against him so that she ain't got to go through this mess no more. He'll be sitting in the jail somewhere, no treatment, just jail. That's it. Because you should have listened to your mom and you already proved you know how to do it. Nigga. And that's the way, in a nutshell, that's what I see us doing, kind of, except we don't have to do that. If it's one thing when somebody that ain't shit and actually is there illegally gets picked up. They're illegally, they get picked up. That's not necessarily personal, but it's something altogether different for us to sit up and look and say, okay, you know what? I'm on call ICE. We don't really need to be calling them white folks on Latin Americans in the first place, because who are the white folks to do what they doing? It just ain't our problem. They're not right for doing this. It's not the right of white folks, morally speaking, to kick anyone out of anywhere. Not even Western Europe, after what they did to everybody else. Eastern Europe is the exception. They didn't do nothing to nobody. And if I find out they did, I'll say the same thing, invade their asses too. But they ain't the colonizers. Them Balkans, Slavic language speaking nations, they're not the colonizers. Romanians who descend from the Romans never colonized, as far as I know. And I don't like them that much. I don't think they like black folks or Muslims that much, but they didn't colonize. They kept the little funky ass attitudes there in Romania for the most part. If they moved somewhere, they moved legally. What about Germans? They ruined Namibia. They had a genocide before the genocide that Hitler enacted in Germany. They had one in Namibia. That's who the hell they been. The Dutch, hell, South Africa, because that's them that started most of that stuff. The British in South Africa eventually said that anyone could take anybody to court for any offense. So that meant that a black South African could take a Dutch person to court for certain offenses. And the Dutch was so mad, they started fighting against the British. They were like, how dare you do this? You don't tell us anything. We never answer to anybody darker than us. And the Brits were not our friends either. But for having that much civility, you already know how the hell the Dutch fought against them for that. That's who the hell they are. And the Brits were the biggest colonizers. So let's not sit up here and start upholding white folks' right to expel anybody. That's not what this is about. This is about us not going to help them because they were not going to do anything to help us. And some would say, well, that extends to them black immigrants as well. They ain't. No, they've actually always been divided about this. That is the truth. They've always disagreed with us about certain things, but it's been very rare that they just outright hate us. It's like I said, when they tell their kids, stay away from the black Americans, it's one particular cultural group within a nationality. And when they're the ones calling us Akatas, and that's the word not even from their own language, but from somebody else's. They're the only ones that'll say that. But then again, quiet as it's kept, they'll turn around and tell their kids, stay away from the Yoruba, stay away from the Hausa, stay away from the Fulani, stay away from the Edo. They'll tell their kids the same things. And because they're particularly nasty when they are rude, they'll tell you that they tell their kids, stay away from the Akatas. Just the Akatas. Everybody else is fine. But then when they get around Yorubas, they'll tell the Yoruba, I tell my kids, stay away from the Yoruba. Just you, everybody else is fine. And that's the way they talk when they're joking, when they're trolling. See, when I have an argument, I got a particular cousin. This cousin is going all over the spectrum, religiously speaking. He said he was Muslim at one point, but when I found out what he believed, there was another religion. But then recently, about 2021, no, that's not recently actually, but in my mind it is because I'm so damn old. 4 years is nothing to me. I'm so old I owe Moses money, alayhi salam. But he made this mistake of insulting Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam on Facebook. And I unfriended that nigga. Never said another mumbling word to him electronically. This is an enemy of God in our definition. And that's if he's mentally well and accountable for what he's doing and saying. That doesn't mean that I come and I invite you to go and harm this dude. I cut him off. Now, in a Sharia jurisdiction, I may call the law on him, drag him in myself. But then again, I may just cut him off like I did in this case. It doesn't mean I turn around and I invite enemies of ours to go in on this guy and go after him. It doesn't mean I sit up and call the KKK and say, hey, he's over here. This is the time of day when he's by himself. It doesn't mean I would do that. And that's what I don't want us to fall into when it comes down to when it comes down to us looking at these ICE raids and mocking these non-black immigrants who told us to just work hard and things will be better. And even when black immigrants say it, they've said it and it's not right. But while we're mocking these other groups for saying this, because they would have turned around and said the same thing to African immigrants or Caribbean immigrants. Keep that in mind. All immigrants are not united. I want you to understand that. All immigrant groups are not united in the United States. They are not. They tell us that they are. And I know because I've had a Spanish teacher at Morehouse lie to me about that stuff. Talking about, well, I have more in common with the black immigrants from other countries than they have in common with you because y'all are black American. I'm like, yeah, okay. I've actually she was one of the reasons I started hanging out with more and more brothers from other countries. And I was like, no, I didn't believe it when she said it. When I started bumping into more Liberians and hanging out with them, I found out that ain't true. We got the same bad habits and good habits. Same things. And I went once I was at a soccer game and some Liberians had the field reserved for an actual game. And there were some Mexicans. They were not Latinos. They were specifically not, I'm not assuming that they were Mexicans. They were actually Mexican. I could understand their Spanish. Their accents were very clear. And when I translated for Liberians and said that they had a reservation, then one of the Mexicans didn't realize that that I'm an African too. And he made a joke about them stinking because they're black. And I said, you piece of shit, why don't you come closer and tell them that? I'll translate for you. And he took off running. Little bitch. Really, I was trying to get him to come closer so that when I told him and he would turn around, I figured that he would tell them. And then when he turned around to leave, I'd be right there and I'd grab him. And then I would tell him I'm the most African here and knock his ass out in front of his people. I was trying to start a mass fight as an adult, as a grown man. I was going to start a fight between Liberians and Mexicans because we're right and they're wrong. When I say we, I mean black folks. When it comes to race, it's always black folks that have been right because we don't start racial conflicts. Our conflicts are everything but racial. You'll notice that anytime we start some shit with people, it ain't about race. It could be about anything but race. You ever notice that? The only time the closest we ever do to starting shit about race is when we start something with people of our own race, but a different complexion. That's the closest we ever come. We're not the same. We do that as black Americans. We never go after somebody about race. We make jokes usually about complexions. And we done said some real nasty shit about all complexions, except the ones dead smack in the middle. We done that. It happens back in Africa too. I've seen them do it. And I know because later on, the Liberians that were playing, they were playing against some Senegalese. And the Senegalese against whom they were playing were all Wolof. And the Liberians were just cackling and cracking jokes about their language and their looks. So I was actually getting on the Liberians later on the same day, like, what the F, man? Just play the damn game and stop mocking them. If you're going to mock them, how do I know I'm not next? So we haven't been united, and I'm not trying to act like we are. But what I am going to say is that at the very least, we can repair this as relatives that got snatched away from each other. Now, I know some of you are going to say, no, we didn't get snatched away from each other. They sold us. The ones that are alive today are also victims of this. They're victims of colonization and sometimes even enslavement. If they're from the Caribbean, they're victims of both. If they're from the Congo, they're victims of both. If they're from other parts of the continent, they're at least victims of colonization. And that was something that was able to be done because Africa had been abnormally depopulated from the slave trade. By the time of colonization, the ones who had sold other Africans to white folk, even the ones who had sold them knowing that this was American chattel slavery from which they were never going back. I mean, New World, when I say American, were dead. They were old and dying, or they were dead by the time they got to that point. Colonization was largely 1884. If my memory's right, that was the time of the Berlin Conference. Maybe I'm off by a year. That's what I'm trying to get at this point. By the time colonization was well underway, let's say by 1890, the ones on the continent were also victims. They had lost relatives. They'd heard about it. And when I meet the Hausa here today that are Saudi citizens of Nigerian and Chadian origin, you know what I find? They heard stories not about how they sold some no good niggas to white folks to get rid of them. That's not the story they heard. They heard stories about their people and other people's vanishing, disappearing, just gone, just gone. That's what they heard. And that's one of the reasons, actually, that quite a few of them migrated to what is now the Hijaz. Some of them went in the 1700s, some in the 1800s, and some in the 1900s. But in the 18 and 1900s, one of the reasons they'd gone was because people were vanishing. And then another reason was because of colonization. So they were going to migrate to the religious Holy Land in the hopes that that would be left alone. This is more complex than what many of us even think. And if you don't like to actually sit the F down and read history and then ask other people and learn this stuff, fuck the shuck up before you sit up and invite somebody else to come in and intervene in this internal matter of ours. Arguments are ours, not theirs. It's not theirs to exploit. Our arguments are not the mestizo Latinos to exploit who doesn't know he's black and wouldn't admit it if he did. Our arguments are definitely not for white folk to come in and exploit. Our arguments are not even for the Arabs to come in and exploit if they're not black or don't know they're black and wouldn't admit it if they did. Our internal arguments are ours. So go ahead and mock all these other groups that look down on us for racial reasons, when we and Caribbeans and Africans have been at each other's throats about certain things. It has been about things that we have done, bad habits that all of us got. It ain't been about race. It's not about a DNA sequence. If they disagree with us, it's about practices. And we could be right and their asses are wrong. But we're going to handle this ourselves. This is not something to where we sit up and say, well, he said we got no culture, so I'm going to call ICE on him. Chances are he's going to have his papers anyway. And truth be told, a lot of times what has happened is that some of us have shared things that they have learned from the culture of their parents, and they want us to be able to benefit from something that actually did work. That's one of the things, sometimes that's why they will say some things that they are saying that are not meant to hurt, not meant to harm. And all I ask is, our reaction to that has to depend upon how you handle the reverse. If I tell you about something that is in my family's culture or amongst my people's culture that has actually worked, would you listen? If you will, great. Now we can trade information. If you're going to sit up and say, but you niggas, okay, you know what? Screw you. But I'm not going to sit up here and invite the grandchildren of the ones who caused this goddamn problem to come in and put more distance between us geographically. Screw that too. See, I had one of my closest friends is gone now. He died of leukemia. When he got picked up in the U.S. by INS, that's what they were calling him at that time. He was picked up for being a threat to national security, and he wasn't. But he became very serious about this religion, and he learned some things about the religion even a lot of Muslims don't know. Now, there's a relationship between that and what I'm telling you right now. Internal business is not external. Don't invite external people, especially enemies, to handle your internal affairs. It has to do with that. But they came and picked him up. And you know what? He did not know that he was in the United States illegally. He really didn't know that. He'd been in the U.S. from the time he was 2 or 3. He could not remember his life, his early childhood in Senegal. He knew he was born there, but he could not remember his early childhood in Senegal. He had applied for a passport. It never came, and he wasn't really aware of what the reason was. That's how he found out that he actually wasn't a naturalized citizen. He thought he was from his parents. I don't know how he got the idea. And they had already gone back home. His parents had already returned home. This man got picked up on some political religious stuff. But he was already planning on leaving the U.S. This is before SYS, before I knew about IBMOR, SYSBM, any of that stuff. This is before I knew about that. 2018 was when he passed away. But he got picked up, I think he got picked up in 2011. They told him that he was going to be deported. He said, hurry the hell up, because I was working and I was about to start saving up to move. You just saved me a plane ticket. Let's get to it. You know that because he told them that, they held him for 7 months. It cost them $10,000 a month to house him in detention. And he said to them, hurry up and send me back. You're wasting your own damn money. I wanted to go back. If you want to waste $10,000 a month, why don't you just give it to me? He would tell them this. Out of spite, they held him in detention for 7 months. Then they sent him back. He gave me a buzz from Senegal, and I was working that one good job that I had. I was about to get laid off and didn't know it. That's when he told me what had gone on, what had happened. He didn't talk down on African Americans. He didn't blast us even when he was well within his rights to, because there are things that we'll do that'll justify, just like there are things his people will do that'll justify it. But he actually said, you know, he would tell me the good and the bad things about his people in Senegal. He would just be open and honest. And he would say to me, he said to me, you helped me more than my own family members did. I don't know if I can ever repay you. He introduced me to my second ex-wife. That was him. These have been my experiences. You got every right to fight back against the ones that are biased against us. Every right to do that. I'm not saying don't take up for yourselves when you're right. Now, when we're wrong, and there are times we are, when we're wrong and someone checks us on it, damn it, we wrong. We don't need to be sitting up here trying to justify what's wrong. That'll make us no better than these little punk ass students I taught last semester. And I'm talking the ones that cheated, not just the ones that failed, but the little shitbags that cheated and lied. That will make us no better than them. It will make us no better than the little badass Latin kids that I taught in middle school before I left the United States, who always wiggled around accountability and always believed that they never deserved to be punished no matter what they did. Yeah, they were bad. They were some little psychopaths. They were becoming that. And the ones of them, the funny thing is that the ones of them that knew how to behave never got what they needed because they couldn't even get the attention. That was real bad. I'm not telling you not to fight back against the ones that say stuff like we have no culture. No, grill their ass. Someone says that if they're black or not, or they're black and don't know it, or black and won't admit it, Fat Joe, whatever the case is, or black admixed and completely ignoring whoever it is, get on their ass about it. Kai Sanat, no, do not let that nigga get away with that because he black. Talking about we have no culture. Well, your culture wasn't immune to colonization. If we got no culture, we started off having your culture. So how do we lose it? Because the thing to understand is that when I told you all the first time what the solution is for black folk, which is really anybody's solution, I want y'all to keep in mind, everybody's culture is shit. Ours, white folks, Latin Americans, yeah, all of our cultures are shit. That's the truth of the matter. That is the talent of human beings in general, be they the worst colonizer, slave master, or be they the most beaten and the most oppressed of us, who most deserving of relief from this. We have a knack for coming up with shit cultures. The Arabs, the Africans from the continent, the Africans that live in the South Pacific called Melanesians, the Polynesians, the ones who colonized all of us, African Caribbeans, African Americans, African Brazilians. You go deep enough into anybody's culture and you're going to find not that everything about it is crap, but you're going to find that there's enough shit in it to make it worth an overhaul. The difference really is not that we don't have a culture or that our culture is crap. The difference is that we black folks aren't lying about this anymore. And we're not willing to defend what is crap, that we can identify it as such. We are looking and saying, okay, we know we have these accomplishments in our history and we got these dysfunctions in the present. Them two don't jive with each other. We're going to fix this shit. The difference is that African Americans are willing to analyze and fix this. And when you start getting into the conversations, the internal conversations between Nigerians, between Ghanaians, especially Nigerians, between South Africans, when you get into their internal conversations, then you will find that they also tend to discuss things they got to do differently. Mostly what they're starting with, be they Liberian or Nigerian, mostly what they're starting with is how they're going to tackle the corruption that makes everything ultra expensive there. And Liberia has done a pretty good job in the countryside of that. Africa's changing. Arabs have similar conversations. They just don't want anybody else in on them. Even if it's a friend. I experienced that my second week in this kingdom. Second week in the kingdom, I think it was. Somebody asked me, well, what are the shames of the Arabs? And all the rest of them told him to shut the hell up. I couldn't even answer. I was going to sit up and say, well, it's an easy answer. Your shames are the same as my own people's shames. I know what they are, but the list is the same. I was going to say that and be done with it, right? The rest before I could say anything. Because I was going to give an answer that was designed to help them, before I could say a mother cuss word thing, all the rest of them told him to shut the hell up. They're asking him, like, why the hell would you even ask a non-Arab that question? He ain't supposed to know. And mind you, a lot of what they were saying, I didn't fully understand yet because I was 2 weeks in the country. I started learning Arabic when I landed. I didn't even know the word shame until a bilingual person there translated it. What are the shames of the Arabs? I understood every word in his sentence except the word shame. Well, that's what this question was about. Somebody translated, said, Ayub is shame, or Ayub is the shames. What are the shames of the Arabs? I was like, oh, well, it's the same as my people's. I said, Nefs Ayub Komi. And they didn't hear it because at the time I said Nefs Ayub Komi, which means the same as the shames of my people, they were telling him to close your mouth, don't, and other stuff I didn't understand. But they have them. And I'm telling you what they are, not because I hate them. I don't hate the Arabs. I'm telling you this so you understand that their shames are the same as ours. But what has separated us from many other people is that black folk, as long as others ain't up here trying to kick our asses for it and beat us to the punch, we black folks will try to come with the vocabulary and then have discussions about how to fix the shit when we know it's not working. That's what's changed. That's what's different about us in general. African Americans are having these conversations, but we do not have the benefit of our own press to keep this shit private and internal. That is what makes us different. When Mexicans talk about what to change about Mexico, they have these conversations with themselves. And even though they speak the same language as Guatemalans, their press is not going to publicize these discussions for Guatemalans. A Guatemalan could find out, but they got to go and look for this information. They're not state secrets, but they're not publicized either. The difference is that when we have these discussions, they make it to Hollywood. Not the discussion, but the subject of the discussion will make it to Hollywood, Then it goes into a movie. And then we think the movie's just for us. Lo and behold, you know what? No, they're on Netflix. You can get Tyler Perry movies on Netflix here in Saudi Arabia. Oh, yeah. With Arabic subtitles at the bottom. That's what's different. But we still have the right to sit up and say to others that are not us, listen, you sit your ass out this conversation. We and the Senegalese are going to deal with this ourselves. It ain't your business. Okay, you know what? You sit your ass over there and close your damn mouth. We and the Nigerians are going to deal with this ourselves. We and the Jamaicans, we and the Bajans, the Jamaicans and the Bajans are going to deal with that themselves. The Jamaicans and the Nigerians are going to deal with that themselves. And if they're going to ask for any mediators, we will be available before your ass gets to do anything about it. We of other nationalities that are still black will do something about that if they ask us to intervene before you step your little non-black ass thinking you superior, even if only subconsciously. Now, what I would say is, if another group of people has experience with handling a conflict through mediation. They could simply log or share the logs of how that went down, historically speaking, and we could pick what's going to work for us and what's not. That's the most polite way to contribute to a peacemaking effort between somebody else that ain't neither one of whom is your ass. But this notion of us getting ready to call somebody who doesn't really have the moral right to do what they're doing, to turn around and do it to someone that's related to us, when really we could fix it ourselves, because it ain't as bad as we think it is on social media, is ludicrous. It's bogus. And that just continues some of the same problems we've always had. One of the major things is that Black folks as a race are the only race that don't understand that we are a race when dealing with other races. Every other race, having come from us, does not have racial solidarity any more than we do until the darker races come into their proximity. Then they do have it. This is across the board. That's global white supremacy right there. Europeans don't always walk around thinking about their whiteness till they come across any other race, because other races on average will be darker than them. Eastern Asians, which you might call Orientals in the United States, don't walk around thinking about race. They think about nationality. But the minute that people dark, not white folks, but the minute people darker than them start noticing their women, and their women start noticing these men that are darker than them, they're going to take issue. You get into Southeast Asia, and for some reason it ain't like that. Gee, I wonder why. There are a few exceptions. That's the one of which I'm aware. But it's always been that way. Chinese migrate into the United States. They migrate into Europe. Do they start up businesses and just start draining the local economies and giving nothing back? They know better than to do that mess. Absolutely. They don't wall themselves off from white folk. They may retain their culture. Well, they may. We think of them as retaining their culture. In reality, they'll start melting in. It takes them a while. They probably can't melt into white folks' cultures, but they'll do it as best they can over generations. That's different. Did you know that there are Chinese living in the Solomon Islands? Solomon Islands, y'all. Yeah, that's a black country in the South Pacific, Melanesia. That's where you got the black folk that have the naturally blonde hair, and they've had it for 12,000 years. The gene for that is different from the gene that causes blonde hair in Europe, by the way. Same expression, different gene. So anyway, getting back to that, yeah, that's the Solomon Islands. Did you know that when the Chinese go over there, they open up shops, they drain the local economy, they live with each other in nicer neighborhoods, they do not help the local economy. And they've been burned down too in riots because of that. Did y'all know that? Same dynamic that the Solomon Islanders face. Same dynamic. Yeah. So if I meet some Solomon Islanders in the United States somehow, which I never have, but if I met some, you think I'm going to sit up and start an argument with them? Hey, what y'all think about black Americans, huh? Start looking down my nose at them, quizzing them like an inquisitor. What am I, the niggerish intuition? No. If we get a chance to meet and we talk, I'll listen and I'll respond peacefully, because then, in all honesty, a peaceful exchange leads to a peaceful exchange of information, and keep that in mind. And it gives you a chance to plant the seeds in somebody else's mind that you want to grow later on as experiences water them. Just don't lie to them, because they'll catch you. That's what I would do. And eventually, you know what? If we met enough times, we would have I would know the strengths and weaknesses of the ways that the Solomon Islanders live and how they relate to other people that have lived there. And they would see the parallels between how they've related to others that have moved over there that ain't black, and how we've had to relate to others that ain't black, because of, in both cases, being because of what non-black folks chose when it came to us. I didn't want this to go over an hour, and I'm sorry about that, but I wanted to do justice to the topic. This part two is pretty much about how we need to treat internal affairs like internal affairs. And in order for Black folks of any nationalities to not be easy targets, we've got to treat the race like, when it comes to other races, we have to start treating it like an internal affair. I don't like racial division any more than most people do, but I understand that I'm not the one that caused it. My race didn't cause it. We didn't cause it. We just have to react to it. And how do you react to it? You don't invite other races to settle your affairs, your internal affairs. That includes not calling white folk to go and expel someone. They may do it anyway, but in this case, that would be one of the dumbest phone calls you could make, because the truth be told, the darker an immigrant is in the U.S., even outside of Blackness, the darker an immigrant is, the more likely they are to be in the states legally, on average. On average. Coming from outside of the America, well, let me put it like this. Yeah, coming from outside of Central and South America and Mexico, that is very true. Coming from islands, coming from other continents, across waters, across seas, where there's no contiguous landmass, that generally does tend to be true. The darker an Indian is, the more likely they are to be in the nation legally, because that's what white supremacy does. It scrutinizes. The truth be told, the paler an immigrant is from any country, the more likely they are to be successful once they acquire the requisite skills for a good job, because they're the first ones to get hired. Studies showed that over a decade ago. I was there in the US when it got published. You take two people from Bangladesh, equal English fluency and education, and the paler one is going to wind up getting the good job. That also holds true for how the US scrutinizes for immigrants. It happens subconsciously, I'm sure, and sometimes even consciously, but definitely subconsciously. So calling these folks who don't really have a right to expel anybody, morally speaking, but who legally are doing it, calling them on a Black immigrant is one of the dumbest calls you can make, because that Black immigrant's very likely to have papers in order. At the worst, something expired. That's usually how it is, that Black folks that are not from South and Central America or Mexico, Black folks that are not from Latin America, I'll put it like that. Most commonly what happens is that if they are in the US illegally, they entered legally and something expired. That's normally the way that goes, if they're there against the law. Now, if one of them says, I know Black, and then you find out about something expired, and when I say that, I'm talking whatever their first language is. If they sit up and say something about not being Black and not even being part of the race, and there's something else, and they start on that mess, okay, you know what? They said it. You can look at them, see the Black blood. They can see it. They just lied. They said it. Go ahead and make that phone call, because what they're saying is that this is not an internal matter. This is not a discussion between two Black folks of different nationalities. That's what they're pretty much saying. Okay, all right, you know what? Doesn't matter if you make. I don't think you should make the phone call per se, but again, it's not my business, because this is no longer an internal affair. We have to start thinking about ourselves as a future nation, because we were forced to be. Black folks have never all been united. Races have never all been united, except there's one exception, and that is, as I stated, when a darker race enters the picture, the paler race will then become united on the basis of race. Even if none of the two races are Black, that's what happens. Even if none of the two races are white, that tends to be what happens. So we're forced to start acting like a nation reactively, because we're the only ones who haven't fully understood this dynamic yet. And I'm not going to lie, it has largely been the most militant of Black folks, whether it's an African American or militant Kenyan or militant Ghanaian. It has been the most militant of Black folks that have come to understand this at some point. The problem I have with them is only that when there is an exception, they don't know who it is. To them, the Malaysian is just as racist as the EDL, the English Defense League in the UK. To them, there's no difference between your average Malay Muslim who doesn't have anything against anybody and the EDL. They don't know the difference, and that's why I get on their butts. But that's another talk for another day. I'm sorry that I'm having a hard time keeping something like this so short, like I used to be able to do. I really am sorry about that. But you know what? I don't want to do injustice to it. So I'm gonna tell you straight. If you're black of any nationality and you insult FBA or you insult another group of black folk for something they didn't do in some way I know they don't deserve, we can hash this out internally. I'm not advocating that they go and call INS on you. But you likewise have to understand and return the same courtesy. And yeah, you know what? Keep fighting back. Straight up. Keep on fighting back. Grill Kai Cenat on his culture. Okay, Kai, we don't have any culture. Screw you, but you know what? What is the name of your parents' language? What culture did you learn from them? And what does it involve that is deeper than just music and dances, by the way, or some dishes? What are deeper elements of that affect morality and character? Tell us what makes yours so special. Grill his ass and do it publicly. Where are his people from? Find out. Because in all honesty, this would actually help. Believe it or not, yeah, this would help future discussions like that. It would help the ignorant amongst black folks of any nationalities to be less ignorant. I think I've said enough. You've been very patient. Thank you so much. I really do mean that from the bottom of my black heart, from the depths of my black mind. Thanks for being patient on this long Jet Black Airways flight. Black heart, black mind, blackout. Assalamu alaikum. Black heterosexual, non-select male power because they don't like it in black patriarchy until extinction of Judgment Day. Appreciate you flying with us on Jet Black Airways, where the phrase jet black is also a verb. Keep jet black with us till the wings and the wheels fall off. Gender, justice, forever.